Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello and welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today I have with me Carrie McKeegan. Welcome to the show, Carrie.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So, Carrie, you do some of all the exciting stuff that people hate doing themselves. So do you want to give the audience a little bit of background to what you do and how exciting you make it?
Sure. I've never heard it described that way before, actually. I like it. So I run a business that does taxes for Americans who live overseas. We are called Greenback Expat Tax Services, and we're about a 10-year-old company, all 100% remote.
Sounds perfect. Now, are you saying no one else don't like doing their taxes?
What I'm saying is that I've never heard it described so nicely before. People usually describe it in a very like, oh, she does this really boring thing.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, but that's good. And how big is your company now, Carrie? How much staff do you have?
We're about 50 people now.
50 people. So that's a lot of taxes.
Yeah. So we actually do taxes. I think we literally have every single country that we do taxes for Americans living in every single country across the world. So it's quite a big operation at this point.
Wow, that's impressive. How long have you guys been going?
So we started the business 10 years ago. So last year was our 10-year anniversary. So yeah.
Amazing.
So yeah, it is. And it's funny because we started the business when we were living in London, and we really just thought, oh, people in the UK need this, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew. So it's pretty nice to see where it is now.
Excellent. Yeah, that's how the best businesses grow. I think a lot of the time, people start up in one direction, and like a lot of the time when people are starting a business, they need to either fumble around to find their niche, suddenly they hit something and they're like, wow, I hit gold. So it's often trial and error, and awesome to hear you've built such a big business by now.
Yeah, it's fun.
From a management standpoint, how do you think management? Because one of the most exciting things for me interviewing you is I've heard you speak a few times, and I love the way you guys do things a little different. So how do you think management, and when you think about management in general, like what's sort of your philosophy and so on?
Well, it's hard to sum up in just a few words, but essentially, for me, I run a 100% remote team, and that's really common these days, but 10 years ago, it really wasn't. 10 years ago, it was like, how do you know if people are working? How do you get to know them? Like it was, really, really very different. And so I think, when I think about why I always thought that was possible, is that I really think kind of the best and brightest people and the people that I want to work with don't need that constant oversight. And frankly, they don't really want it. So my philosophy overall is bring in people who are better than you are at whatever it is you're trying to hire for. So, every single kind of piece within the company, have an extraordinary amount of trust. But I also am a very, very structured person. So I really I really believe in the idea of having strong and really kind of robust SOPs. We do a lot of management reporting. So in general, I think there's probably two things that really compose my management style. And one is, really bringing in people who can operate very independently and don't need a lot of oversight and, are just really, really capable at whatever it is we're bringing them in for. But two, actually making sure that you have kind of a structure and a way that you have things reported against in place.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and I really like the way you're talking about that. I've definitely experienced a lot of people who are hiring great people and so on, but exactly where most of them fail is they give a ton of responsibility, and they often struggle to follow up. They struggle to have good numbers and so on, right? So obviously your structured personality is a benefit in that regards, because even when you have like the most amazing people, for all of us, like deadlines and targets and goals is things that push us as human beings, right? And if we don't have a boss pushing us, if we don't have like someone who's, pushing a little bit harder than we would ourselves, then, you're not getting the most out of people. So I really like the way you think about that.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even just about getting something out of people, because I kind of inherently believe that people try their best, that they really
Yep.
want to do good work and that they really want to contribute in this world. But sometimes it's about that really, really clear identification of what good looks like. So if you don't have something very defined, sometimes it's actually really hard to know if you are kind of 1% apart all the time in terms of the direction. So it's having that really, really good clarity on the metrics, on the goals, so that you just know that you're all deploying your efforts in the right direction.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. And how big is your management team right now? Like, how many managers do you have?
It's about 10 people, I want to say, including me.
Okay. That's a great number with 50 staff.
And I have to say, I call the management team everybody who's not doing taxes. So that's not the same as the leadership team. So we only have a couple of people that are, heading up, marketing or operations or HR. But, we have, people that are doing sales and customer service and, helping manage the, the systems and things like that. So that's kind of the full end to end in terms of who's doing non-tax related work.
Sure. That makes sense. And yeah, people always look at that slightly different, right? But yeah, that's good. And what do you see like currently? What's the biggest challenges? Like, what's the biggest sort of management things that you struggle with the organization you have and a company that have been going for 10 years?
We're growing, which is a wonderful thing to have. But I feel like one of my big goals for 2020 is to make sure that we're sort of setting ourselves up and planning for like a year in the future, as opposed to 3 to 6 months in the future. So What I'm finding is that, we do a ton of reporting, a ton of planning, and a ton of structure, and we're really, really good at that. But we're always just a little bit understaffed. And I actually don't mean on the accountant side of things. I mean on the management team side of things. So we just seem to always have a little bit more that we want to do than we, have time to do. A little bit of that stretch. And so my real goal is to just create a little bit more flex for people in their days, so that not only are we doing all of the projects that we know need to get done, but that there's just a little bit of time to kind of explore some fun opportunities and feel like we're kind of getting ahead of things, as opposed to just having enough time to do the sort of, not minimum, but just the sort of base level of activity. So it's definitely, for us, it's about kind of catching up to that growth a little bit and trying to just be a little bit ahead of that in terms of workload.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always a funny concept, right? Because I think if you're talking most entrepreneurs, I think no one ever walks home and have everything done, right? We can always find more stuff to do, but there's definitely a very good balance to be struck between it, right? And obviously, if there's very sort of critical projects you can't get done, and particularly if there's stuff where you can bring in additional resource and get a huge ROI on it, like that's really where the magical line is. So that's a really interesting observation.
Yeah, and we have, there's all these kind of fun marketing campaigns that we don't know if they're going to work or not, right? Like, we have absolutely no idea. And so it's a hard thing to prioritize that if you have other things that are going to work. But that's where kind of real improvement lies, is being able to do those things where you're kind of testing and experimenting. And that's my goal, is to be able to give that time back to people, to be able to, try things out that maybe don't have a great ROI, but they want to try, and, then kind of embed that into our, overall business habits, the things that work, and, kind of abandon the things that don't.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And Carrie, what's the biggest management challenge you've faced so far in the 10 years the business has been going? Like, what's the biggest sort of oh shit moment you've had from a management standpoint?
So from a people management perspective, you tend to find, and I think this is fairly common in companies that grow very fast, is that you tend to have sort of people on the team that are wonderful, that you kind of outgrow. And it's about making sure that you have a really good balance of kind of knowing what the business needs and also doing right by your team. I don't know how to put it exactly, but I essentially want people to continue to grow with us. And sometimes I fail to see if they're wanting those increased responsibilities, increased roles. If that's that prompt is coming from them, or if it's more coming from me, for example.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. And I think very often it's also sort of it can be very complicated because sometimes people don't naturally show it, where you need to encourage them and something they actually end up loving and really want to do. But there's definitely also times where you have people that they've reached the level they want to be, or they're in a job they really love and so on, right? So that's definitely a tough balance sometimes. So.
Yeah, and often people think that the right answer is to say that they want more responsibility. So they're conditioned to believe that the default answer is, well, of course, if I'm an individual contributor, I want to be a manager. Or if I am, working in one part of marketing, I want to work in another part of marketing too. Like, people feel that that's the right answer. And I think sometimes you need to read between the lines and kind of look at behaviors and kind of where people are just kind of can't help them work on those things, as opposed to what they're saying specifically. Able to say, hey, you don't have to do leadership if you actually don't want that. Don't feel like that's sort of the default answer here. That's not something that I need you to be able to do, to be able to stay with the team.
And I think that's a very, very good point, right? Like, honestly, I work a lot with a lot of entrepreneurs in the same mindset, right? Like, a lot of people, they're looking at people around them and, their partner and whatever, they're all pushing them like, oh, you should do this, you should do this. But really getting to know yourself and, understanding what it is you really enjoy is just so much more important. And I think, like, I've seen many people move sort of sideways within a business, like, if they're in marketing, move into web dev, or, move, like, it's not always about up. And particularly in sort of jobs like you have, where it's location independent, like, that gives generally people a lot of opportunities to do many other things in their life where work might not be the center, right? And work can still be an important part, but there are other things that they prioritize higher, and like growth from, for example, a management standpoint is not necessarily the thing they want to do, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think, and most entrepreneurs, I mean, when you're looking at most entrepreneurs, they're always told, oh, make more money, 10x, 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 and, grow it really big and stuff. And so often, like, I tell people, like, is that what you want, or is that what people tell you should want? Because that is, like, when you build a business, that's really important, right?
Right. Being really intentional about the level of growth. And that's something that, is a challenge for us as a business, because, we need excellent, really, really talented accountants to be able to grow the business well. So people often say to me, like, oh, well, if you look at the number of expats that are out there and you look at kind of your marketing skill set, like, you guys could grow 500% next year. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't think that's the right thing to do, because the minute you start growing that fast, you kind of lose control of it, manage it in a certain way. So there's so many different reasons why really, really fast growth sometimes just isn't a smart move. I mean, it really can derail people.
Yep. Yeah, and like in most businesses, it's about keeping that balance, right? Because one of the key things I always work with people on is setting good business goals that actually balance, like, sales, marketing, and operations. Because a lot of time people are like, oh yeah, let's invest a lot of money into sales and marketing and get a lot more clients, but actually forget that it has to be fulfilled somehow, right?
Right.
And if you get a lot of clients but you're doing a shit job when you get them, that can, like, really hurt you.
Yeah. And I have to say, if there's one thing, that's one thing that we actually did really well, which almost killed us. I mean, it absolutely was, so hard to do, where we kind of, realized at a point about 3 years ago, I looked at all of our systems and infrastructure, and I was like, oh, we're just going to outgrow this. And it's just, it's kind of not a good idea to be on systems that will sustain you for another year or two. And that's probably a little bit of an exaggeration. So we really stopped and kind of completely set up the business so that it can scale fully operationally. But it meant that all of our management time and attention for about 2 years was about implementing these completely different scalable systems. And frankly, that's not as much fun in some ways, right? So it was a little bit of a challenge to get everybody deployed and excited about doing that for that long of a time.
So, and again, that depends on who you're talking with, right? Because a lot of entrepreneurs would not find that exciting, but there's definitely people who love doing that sort of thing, right? So again, if you get the right people working on it, they keep themselves entertained, right?
Yeah. I think I'm thinking some of the sales and marketing and the accountants were like, I don't want to switch systems. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want a new way of doing things. You're like, well, this is what we're going to do. And now they love it, but it definitely wasn't a fun transition. People don't always like change in terms of process.
Definitely. And you know, new is always scary in one way or another. So,
right.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think like you see it with majority of businesses, like like I work a lot with sort of very online businesses, right? And like a lot of SaaS companies and SEO companies and so on. And every company that I've gotten to where you are with 50 people, they've all had at least one of these spells of period of time where they really delivered shit, right? And that's like, it's very interesting to go back and look at, but the thing is they all learn a lot from it, right? They all learn a lot from that experience. And I think it's one of those things that really, when you have first been in a situation where you haven't delivered well, you definitely don't want to go back into that, right?
Yeah. And for us, it wasn't so much that we weren't delivering well, because for customers, it was completely irrelevant. It was the amount of, you know, it was really kind of thinking through, like, in this, you know, the way that we have things structured, you know, we can probably grow 25%, but could we triple? And do we want to, you know, continue to invest time and energy into a system? So like kind of our CRM system was the big thing, and the way the process that sat behind it, in a system that we know, you know, we don't want to continue to improve this. We want something different. So we sort of took a stack and rebuilt all of it. But it was just, you know, it was a lot of energy and attention for something that wasn't already broken. So sometimes I had moments in the middle of that I'm like, what am I doing? This is crazy, right? Just let it keep running as it is. It has no customer impact. But now it's really nice because everything on the back end, all the reporting's really easy, all the, you know, process is really, it's just a, you know, it just sort of sets us up for growth.
Perfect. What is the most unexpected, amazing hire that you've made personally?
Oh, well, so the lady, and she's actually on maternity leave at the moment, but there's a lady named Lisa who helps me run the business. She's the director of business operations. And, yep. You know, when I hired her, I literally was, and I remember exactly what I was doing. It was 2014. And I just needed somebody for a marketing assistant role, like a 30-day, all right, I need some work on marketing. Yep. And I was living in Bali at the time, and it was just one of those like, okay, let's, you know, get somebody in place. Let's get somebody in my time zone, which wasn't the easiest thing at that time. And I just need kind of a second set of hands. So my expectations weren't dramatically high in this hire. I really just needed somebody who can do some marketing intern type work. And I hired this lady, Lisa, and she has sort of, you know, continued, and really she was overqualified for that role from the beginning. You know what I mean? Like, she always could do more than just marketing assistant work. Sure. But she's just been able to really grow from kind of a very, very marketing, you know, specific skill set, you know, focus on marketing operations, and then into people management and being able to see the business end to end. So I would say that was definitely unexpected. I mean, I didn't know when I was hiring her that I was hiring somebody who would be a future leader for the business. That wasn't part of the job brief. And yet, you know, she was the one who sort of really showed those skills and really showed that initiative. Almost from day one, you could see that, you know, she was going to continue to grow and grow. So that's probably my most unexpected.
Awesome. Yep. It's awesome when you have some of those hires, and sometimes you're really depending on it, right? You're really, because hiring people ain't easy. So
yeah. And it's always a real challenge, because hiring for skills and hiring for mindset, it's like, obviously you want to hire for both, right? So you want to hire somebody that has all the skills you need for the job and the right mindset. But one of the things that I've really realized is if you have to choose between the two, you have to hire for mindset, right? So if you get to a point where you're trying to figure out, you know, you need to find somebody and you have two choices, right? And usually you should just keep interviewing, right? But you need to hire somebody who has that growth mindset, that sees things the way that your, you know, company values, you know, resonates with your company values, as opposed to somebody who can just do the contents of that role. That only takes you so far.
Yeah. No, and I mean, honestly, so depending a lot on the role, I mean, it's not a point blank, but I would say a lot of the time, like I would much rather hire people with a great attitude, because I think for most of what we do, at least online, like, you know, it's not that skill heavy. Like, a lot of stuff can be learned pretty quickly, but if you have an amazing human being who just fits in your culture, and as you said, like, just perfect fit for the company, like, they can learn most of the stuff pretty quickly. Now, if you're looking for a web developer or, you know, a certified accountant, obviously they need to have the skills, right? But like, a lot of the time, we really hire a lot of people that probably most others wouldn't have hired, because on paper they might not have the experience or the skills, but the attitude and really the mindset for me is just that important, right?
Yeah. And when you think about how easy it is to learn things you don't know, it's pretty impressive, right? So, I mean, most of the learning that a lot of entrepreneurs have, and definitely for me, has come from books, from Googling things, from listening to people. You know, it hasn't come from, you know, it's self-directed learning. So if somebody wants to learn something and they have the desire to learn it, pretty much they can always find a way to do that, and to actually get very, very competent at things through free resources that are out there. So it's not always on the job learning either. I'm always very suspicious of people who, when you interview them, they sort of expect that their manager will teach them how to do things, versus that they will seek that information out and then kind of tweak around the edges with the manager and get leadership, you know, from that manager, as opposed to, I don't know, learning Google AdWords from them or something like that.
Babysitting. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's, it's really interesting. And I think, like, I've interviewed several thousand people in my career so far. And I think about 3 times so far, I've literally not let people leave the room, but it's very rarely that I really find someone that I'm, you know, I want you to work for me right now. But I think 3 times in my career I've experienced it, and I've literally just offered them on the spot, right? And actually 2 of them we weren't even recruiting, or we weren't even hiring particularly at that point in time. But, you know, sometimes you just have these super amazing people that just shows up and totally surprise you, right?
Yeah. And the other thing to note, and, you know, kind of on that same topic, is that super amazing people is a very specific to a particular business, right? So somebody that you might see as super amazing for your business might not be somebody I see as super amazing for mine. So it's also, for me, has been really important, kind of differentiating the, oh my gosh, you're incredible, versus you're incredible for the company culture that I have within the context of Greenback. Because those aren't always the same thing.
100% correct. And that's actually, like, I work a lot with people in terms of, like, interviewing and help them become better at that, right? And one of the things I say is, like, the interview questions that I've built over many years is questions that fits me and my personality and sort of the company culture that I create really well. But they're not necessarily the ideal questions for everyone, because, you know, people have different companies. And I see that, like, when you're actually recruiting and particularly sort of interview process and interview questions and stuff, I see that also being very, very unique, because it's something that you build over time when you start realizing, you know, and I love looking at data. I mean, like yourself, I'm very organized. So I love data. And one of the things I love doing is, like, always asking people the same interview questions, so that I can go back and actually review and see what like, when I look at my top 10% performers, what did they answer in the interviews? Because for me, that's one of the great ways where you can actually find what works and what doesn't.
That's a really good idea. I've never done that before, but I like it.
We do a similar exercise the other way around. So we look at the people we hired that have failed, or people that hired that haven't done so well. And we also try and look at what do they have in common. Because again, it's all about learning from the data, right? And we have found many things. So for example, the outsourcing business we have in Philippines, one of the things that, I mean, it's not obvious, but we learned that people who had lived abroad, even for a 3-month spell, generally did significantly better. And the reason why we realized that was because our HR, like, we were going through all this data. They were sitting looking at the resumes, and basically realized that 9 out of our 10 top performers had actually like that worked abroad or lived abroad for a period of time. And so then we started looking at the rest of the people and we're like, oh, well, no one else have. And that was just a very interesting finding, right?
Yeah.
I actually got it from big corporate. Like when I worked in a different company, we were hiring customer service people. And, you know, that comes with certain varieties and so on. But the one thing we realized was that every time you hired people who had a background as waiters, and this was specific to the US, but every time for customer service, we hired people with a background of waiters, they just did really well. And the logic behind it kind of makes sense. Like when you go in and look at it and say, in the US, you're not a waiter for very long if you're not doing well with customer service, because then you won't get a lot of tips. Mm-hmm. But if you are doing really well and make sure you earn yourself a lot of tips, then, you know, you'll do the job for a longer period of time. And we actually, for customer service role, we started advertising directly to waiters saying, hey, are you tired working at night and, you know, waitering table or whatever? And we would literally target waiters specifically for those roles. And like the improvements we had overall from just hiring waiters or ex-waiters, it was like gigantic, right? So that's actually where I got the initial thoughts about that sort of mindset around. But we do that a lot in every business that I work with.
Oh, I love it. I'm literally taking notes. That's such a great idea, because we don't, I mean, I actually have a very different interview style, which I don't know if necessarily serves me, frankly, but that is that I sort of just follow the thread of what it is we're talking about. So our HR manager does a very, very structured interview. So I sort of know that she will have covered all of the different bases, and what you're describing in terms of data, I'm sure she could go back and use all that. Whereas I just try to sort of see if I can chat to someone for a bit and try to really kind of gauge how they behave in a situation that's a little bit less structured, right? So, yep. You know, but you know, using that data, that's a really, really good tip. It's really interesting. Also, I wonder if it's like a chicken or egg thing. Like, I wonder if people who are good at customer service seek out waiter jobs, for example, or seek out living abroad because they like new experiences, or if it's that anybody who's lived abroad then has, you know, that kind of broadened skill set, and anyone who's had to be a waiter has learned already how to do that. Like, you wonder whether it's, you know, whether it's caused or correlated, or how that kind of works.
Totally. And I think, like, from us, we found actually a very interesting last point about it. We found out that we were hiring from a particular school in the Philippines, like the top rated school in the area where our office is, right? And what we found was literally everyone we hired from the school failed. But the thing is, until we actually started looking at the data, we hadn't realized that. Now, when we started looking at the data, and we're like, you know, we have hired 17 people over the last 2 years who are actually coming from this school or have had an education from this school, and none of them have worked out. Like, none of them have been here more than 6 months, right? Again, it was really interesting data. And when we started digging in it and sort of thinking about it, like it led us to think that it's probably because it's sort of very rich families, and, you know, not to say something directly about those people, but a lot of them felt very privileged, right? And when they came out and had a job and had to work really hard, that was difficult for a lot of them, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that, again, it's those findings that if you don't go in and look at the data very specifically, like, you probably won't find that.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting. I really like it. I'm going to think that through a little bit.
Yep. Always fun, and always fun. Two things: going back, looking at resumes is fun, but also, like, actually looking at people who have been with you for a longer period of time. Like, when you go back and look at, like, what was their interview questions, what was their answers, and we've had a lot of fun with that in the company. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I sense a project, an internal HR project coming on in our business.
I hope you have the resources for it. Right. You onboard a lot of people. Have you got any sort of great tips and tricks around onboarding and so on? So a lot of the people I work with, right, they you know, they're always like, how do I bring people in? Like, when I'm hiring a lot of people, how do I do it well? So any particular things that you have found working really well in that situation?
So what I do is I do 30-day projects, pretty much no matter what level within the management team. And the reason I do that is because I actually think it's really hard for somebody to come in, especially in a remote role, to come in and just kind of see everything all at once, right? Like to be able to come in and get up to speed on everything. I think that's difficult. And it's really, really, time consuming for the rest of the management team to be able to do that too.
Yeah.
But I also think for those people, they really like the idea of being able to get in and get deep and kind of sink their teeth in a project. And you learn the way that they work, they learn the way that you work, they get to know a couple people on that team, and they're kind of immediately contributing. So I look for ways that when we bring people on, they immediately are contributing from day one, and they're immediately adding value, and they're immediately kind of building relationships that aren't based on trying to have a get to know you type call that, sort of can feel a little bit awkward and, a little bit difficult. So I always do a series of different 30-day projects, some that I know are going to be a little bit tricky, some that I know are going to be a little bit easy, and structure it around trying to help people just immediately be able to day one start being as a part of the team, as opposed to, spending a month trying to get up to speed and forgetting all of those things month actually working on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I mean, that's not necessarily 30-day project, but I most of the clients I work with, I tell the same, because like one of the experiences that I remember myself is the first day in a new business. It's kind of weird and scary, and you're kind of trying to find your feet, and you're like, where do I find information? And people's like, oh, it's on the share drive, and you're like, what's the share drive? Where is it? How do I find it? How do I access it? There's so much stuff when you join a company, and I'm totally a believer in what you're saying, because for us, like I always say, give a small project to start that people, they can show their skills, but also that they get a very good first experience in the job, because that way, they really see that, they get that confidence and they get that boost, and so, I'm confident, I'm here. Because a lot of people, when they show up to work, right, what happens is, that they're trying to be confident, they're trying to look good in the interview, but people always question themselves, and getting off to a good start makes a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
So really like that 30-day project. That's really good thinking. I'll definitely try and see if that's a good methodology to go forward for some of our stuff as well. Because like we have done it a lot, but often we would do smaller projects, maybe like a week or something, just to sort of do some confidence boost initially. But 30 days is a good trial period and so on. So yeah, interesting. What else from sort of onboarding? Any other sort of key things that you found being really important?
I mean, I don't do, so we use a system called Podio as kind of our internal kind of project management and, internal collaboration system. And because we have this basically place where you've got all these different workspaces, I make a point of actually not adding new starters to every single thing at first, because I find it can be just completely overwhelming. But I do make sure that they very immediately have access to all the data sources and all the goals. Yeah. So one thing that we do is, I do annual planning. I'm a big planner. So I do annual planning, and we do a series of what we call kind of rocks, which are, it's based on there's a book called Traction, and a lot of my management techniques are kind of borrowed from there. And so we basically have a series of different rocks. And so one of the things I've started to do is that when I present that to the team at the beginning of the year, so for example, we were just in San Diego 2 weeks ago, and I was presenting that to the management team. We record that so that anybody new who starts throughout the year literally can hear it for the first time, including people's questions and commentary and any of that. So, we have somebody new starting with us next week, for example. And one of the things that she'll be able to do right away is listen to the business annual goals and those rocks as if she were there from the, day one, in the same exact context. And of course, we also have a deck that sits behind that, but actually listening to that and listening to the questions, I think really helps. We also do, sometimes I do quarterly goals too, and usually it's just an extension of what we're doing annually unless things really shift. But if anything does shift, I also re-record that stuff quarterly, so that, again, anytime somebody joins us throughout the year, like, they really have a sense of that higher level view, as opposed to feeling like, oh gosh, I have no idea, and it's actually really hard to join mid-year. I don't want anyone to feel that way.
I love that. That is an absolute golden nugget. Yeah, I think that's genius, right? Because I think a lot of people, I mean, Traction have become very popular in the online community and so on, right? And it is a great management system in general. And I think you're taking it a step further, right? You've found something that works really well, and I love how that works, because it actually also gives you a good opportunity to sort of an easier way to actually go back and review it as well, and sort of see how much people grow and stuff. So, but I really love that. That's amazing.
And the other kind of little side benefit to it is, and I've heard a couple different people on my team say it, is that, like, for example, someone's like, a couple of weeks off and they come back and they're like, oh gosh, I need to kind of get myself reacclimated. Like, oh, I listened to all the videos again, and I just was like immediately back into the mode. You know what I mean? Like, so it really helps to kind of, or they're working on a big project and kind of stepped away. Like, people actually re-listen to some of this stuff, which I never, ever expected. I mean, usually that kind of thing is pulling teeth, but people actually do use some of those videos over time to kind of reacclimate themselves to goals.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's great. Okay, yeah, so that's some of the biggest, the last one that I want to ask you about is also one of the most popular questions that I get a lot, which is around delegation, right? So a lot of people in this online space really struggle with delegation and letting go and all this stuff. Any sort of key thoughts, any sort of golden nuggets to people around delegation from your side?
Well, so it's obviously very different at different levels. So speaking to kind of the level that I would delegate to, which is my managers, so people who are very much entitled not entitled, but empowered to make decisions. I think that you very much need to be delegating to outcomes as opposed to tasks. So you're absolutely sort of saying, like, this is, in somebody's role document, you could list out, like, I don't know, send this report on Fridays or do this. And actually, like, that's not what you mean. What you mean is manage to this metric, or make sure that, this overall happens within the business, and choose appropriately what needs to happen within the context of that. So I think it actually starts deeper back than what people think in terms of delegating. So if you're sort of asking that question, I would say you almost need to, like, kind of circle back up and look at your role documents, and also circle back up and make sure that each person is really clear on what KPIs they are, they're responsible for. So if you're delegating tasks, then, basically you're just saying, do this one thing. And if that doesn't go right, then they're not expected to do something else. Whereas if you're sort of saying, I don't know, if you've got that's a good example. If you've got a kind of customer service, person, and you're saying, make sure that you respond, that you go in and manage the inbox each day, you're delegating to a task. Whereas if what you're saying is, do what it takes to make sure that 75% of people are happy within the first, interaction, or 95% of people are happy in the first interaction. It's sort of giving them a broader range of what they can do within that, but also making really clear what you want to do. So I think usually people, when they're asking that, it's because they're giving people tasks, and they're not really realizing that those people don't know the context of those tasks, and don't know that actually what they're expected is to manage to a certain outcome. Now, I have also seen people do that in the wrong way, where they give people too much broad range. And so it really has to depend on the level you're at. So the KPI someone manages to is really key. Bringing in someone junior and having them manage to, like, the company revenue target doesn't make any sense. So it has to be the appropriate KPI for it to work.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. Carrie, that was a really, really, really good discussion. Just before we finished up, any sort of last resources, or you already mentioned Traction, but any other sort of books or anything that you learned from that you would recommend to the audience?
Oh gosh, I usually have like 20 different books I would recommend, but I don't have any ones that I've read recently that I absolutely love, I have to say. Traction's definitely a good one, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I'll throw one at you then. If you're looking for good management tips, first break all the rules. What the world's best managers does differently.
Ah, okay, I'm writing that one down.
That is one of my favorites, and not particularly famous, but I think for business owners, it's a very interesting book.
Yeah. And actually one that I read not super recently is I really like all of Brene Brown's work in general,
Yes.
just in terms of kind of overall, self leadership. But I've really enjoyed some of her more recent work on, leadership in the context of business. So I recommend that to anybody too.
Awesome. That is really good, Carrie. Thank you very much for joining us. If people want to get hold of you, or if they're desperate to get rid of their taxes or dealing with their taxes, what's the best way to get hold of you or the business?
Is www.greenbacktaxservices.com, or our the best email address for any, to be able to get some help with taxes is info@greenbacktaxservices.com.
Awesome. That is really good, Carrie. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.